Good evening, everyone. Remember that there's a text chat attached to the channel here. Hey there, Daniel. Benoit. I apologize in advance for my awful pronunciation of all your names. Yes, the cat decided to be part of the seminar too today. She will be teaching us some things. Okay, let's see if we can start already. Let's go. Anyone else brought the Star Wars t-shirts today? Yes, you would be right. That's Ricardo. Anyway, first of all, welcome and thanks everyone for attending today. We are going to repeat this seminar. This is a seminar that we already held last week. It was on Wednesday, if my memory is not failing me. But not everyone could assist that day or attend, so we are repeating it today, and also because I needed to explain this to my new mentees, the new batch. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to do it. So we are going to explain how to set up a car. In this case, we are going to start setup from scratch, and we are going to consider that the person that is doing this setup has absolutely no previous data to use. So that would be a setup with no previous data to be used. Okay, so what do we need to know? First, what is the driver's range of satisfaction, also known as happy range? Well, the happy range of the driver is that range of values where the driver will comment during setup, during the practice laps, is going to comment that he feels satisfied or he's okay with the setup we have entered. Drivers provide feedback during the practice laps for the setup, and they provide separate feedback for each car part associated to the setup. So it will provide a comment for the engine, another for the suspension, another for the gear, and so on. But in particular, it will provide only one comment for both wings. This means that we need to focus on a central value for the wings. We are going to talk about a different option or a different way to face the wing setups later, but we are going to start from this point where you get, of course, only one comment from the driver. So you can only follow that one comment, and we are going to be using that to find a central value, and we are going to discuss the other considerations for the wing setup later. So what happens with this satisfaction range or happy range with the driver? Well, this range is highly dependent of mainly two driver skills. That is the experience of the driver and the technical insight. So if you have a rookie driver, which is the case with most of you, you're going to find out that this range is huge. Why? Because their technical insight and their experience is very, very low. So as it's dependent, it's going to be very big. We are talking about no less than 100 points, and we are working with a full range of 1,000. So 100, 120, 110, those are the values that we will commonly see for drivers for the rookie level, and that is a little bit a lot, you know. So we are going to work on looking for a method to be able to find the best setup. The best setup is going to be always in the middle of this range. That is, that if a driver feels comfortable with the setup in all the values inside this range, that is going to provide the exact same feedback for all the values inside this range. But the value that is going to provide the best lap time is going to be in the middle of the range. So what is the idea here? First, I'm going to share with you this little formula that is not meant to be shared, but it's still being shared. That is the happy range formula. This is how to calculate your own driver's happy range. As you can see, you have the technical insight and experience in there. You can go and check your drivers and see how what is the value for your particular driver, I mean. And I'm going to show you an example, which is the driver whose setup we are going to be showing during the seminar today. That is this one. This is by no means a viable or a good driver. Yes, I picked this driver because it was very bad, and I didn't want to be using a driver. I used a dummy account to do this, and I didn't want to take an actual interesting or good driver out of the rookie pool for only to use for this occasion. So this driver is hideous. You know, this driver is absolutely horrible. So please don't take the skills this driver has as an example of how a good rookie driver should look, because this is not it, okay? It's just the example we're going to use. So in this case, I calculated the range, and I rounded it to 128. And if you're going to be within a 1 point of the range, it is not very sensitive to 1 point difference, so it will be fine to use a rounded number. So what are we going to do with this number? Well, we are going to calculate this number. We're going to save it for later, and we are going to be using it later on the setup. But how do we start? We need to start somewhere. As we said, we have no previous data. So the usual thing is to start with a setup with all the values of the different parts in 500. the middle of the range. We are going to start from 500, and then we are going to use this guide I have here. I can send an image that can be downloaded or saved for you to use later. But we are going to use this guide, and this guide, what is going to do? This is going to help us from the first comment the driver is going to make. It's going to help us know in what direction we need to move. So if we are at 500 and that is not inside the driver's satisfaction ratio, well, in what sense I need to move, in what direction? Well, this guy is going to tell you, according to the driver commentary that is in the feedback, is going to tell us in what direction we should be moving, because it's going in the direction of the satisfaction ratio of the driver. And the proposed values that I put here are only an example. This is not exactly the values that you should be using. You should be using something similar. I've seen people using values in the range of 264, 128, instead of 125. 64 instead of 68, it's not very relevant. We are going to arrive to the exact same point in the same number of steps. So if you have seen something similar that is not exactly like this, it's going to be useful anyway. Don't worry about that. So this is going to be the starting point, as I said. And we are going to start with the driver using all the parts at 500. This is the lap number 1 after the lap number 1, using the values of 500 that I picked for this driver. So what happens here? We have the 6 values and the 5 commentaries, because the wings are the same. And in this case, we have 2 parts that are, when with this value of 500, are already inside the driver's satisfaction range, and others that are not. What will be the ultimate objective of this method? Well, if we know in what point, in what value, or a value very close to the actual value, where the limit of this range is, that means that we are between the point where the driver is satisfied and the point where he stops being satisfied and starts making comments about the values being off. In that point, where the limit is, we can very easily find the center of the satisfaction ratio. Okay? If we are in one extreme of the other, all we need to do is to move half of this satisfaction range. For example, in my example, it's 128, 64 points. We need to move 64 points towards the center of the range. So if we know where the limit is, we are going to be able to find the center of the range. But we need to do it individually with each part of the car. So we start here, and then I'm going to show the next slide. Well, I have highlighted what are the things that the driver commented. In this case, I put only the wings, the brakes, and the suspension, because the driver did not comment on the engine and the driver did not comment on the gearbox. That's why I'm showing only these 3 that are the same that we have here. But I highlighted the options that we used. So Driver makes a commentary. Engine, no comments. Gearbox, no comments. So we know that the driver is already inside the satisfaction range for those two. But we are going to need to start moving for all the other values that are not green. This is a very nice addition to the ShePro applications, the Windows ones, the Apple ones, the Steam ones. All the applications have this kind of user interface where you can see colors highlighting if the value is in green when there's no commentary and the driver is satisfied, and you have a little color coded commentary for the values that are off the range. You see that the yellow is closer to the range. Red, of course, is far away from the range, and the orange that is in the middle, in between the not too far and not too close. So I've highlighted that here, and we are going to pick, according to the table I showed, we are going to pick the increments or the values where we need to move towards in order to hit the driver satisfaction range. This is, as I said before, this is an approximation. Sometimes if we use this value, we are going to hit inside the satisfaction range, and sometimes we are going to be a little bit off. But we are going to use another step to get closer. Don't worry, we are going to arrive to the same place. This is not a big issue. But I would recommend you start using these values or values close to these ones. So this is the second lap. As you can see, I used the values that I showed in the previous slide to move towards the range in the case that we weren't already inside the range, which were the wings. I added 63. The brakes, I added 250. And the suspension, I added 125. In the case of the engine and the gearbox, we were already in the green. We were already inside the range. And what I did was using a value that is half of my driver's range. Why? Well, because if we are inside the range already, and this range is 128, the more far away we can be from the center is 128, or not the center of the limit. I mean, I apologize. From one limit or the other, well, we can have a distance from the opposite limit to 128. So if we use a value that is the half, we are going to be we are going to be in a nice range, not too far from the middle of this range. So you can add or you can subtract. In this case, it's the same, because the idea is to find the limit. Then later we're going to move towards the center, but as we are looking for the limit at this point, you can move any direction, subtract or add. It's the same. So engine adding, it was still inside the range, so we are going to keep moving. In this case, we're going to keep moving in the same direction. And in the case of the gear, it's outside the range, so we are going to start using the next concept for how to move the values, which is that we are going to be using the difference between the two numbers, and we are going to use half of that difference each case. And we are going to use a method that is called divide and conquer. Why? Because we are going to make this difference smaller and smaller by half on each iteration. And at a point, we're going to actually know where the limit of the satisfaction range is. So for the points where we already hit the satisfaction range once and we hit outside this satisfaction range once, we are going to start taking the value, the difference between the two values, and using half of that value. In the other cases, we're still going to be trying to hit. In the case we didn't hit the inside of the range, we're still going to try to hit the value inside of the range. And in the case of the engine, we haven't hit a value outside the range yet, so we are going to keep trying to get outside the range. So far, any questions? Let me read. I saw that someone was typing, but okay. Use megabytes principles. As I said this at the beginning, it's the same. There's people who will use 256. There's people who will use 264. You're still going to get the middle of the range. What happens with 256? Well, it's nice to divide into two. In the 100 and 250, the value used. Well, it's a little bit more difficult to divide and get an even number out of it, but it has a nice proportion of the full range involved. So, as I said at the beginning, it's not going to make a difference. You're not going to make an extra step because you started with 256, or if you started with 250. You're going to use the exact same number of steps in all cases. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So what's the next step here? Well, we are going to keep moving the brakes and the suspension. According to the commentary we got in the previous step, as you can see, we have yellow comments here. But I decided that instead of using the yellow ones, I'm going to use a little bit more because we are still a bit away. So I'm going to use a bit more. I'm going to use 125. But again, this is a preference, and you are not going to see different in the number of steps in this case. You are going to get the same if you use 63, 64, or 125. Don't worry about that. But I highlighted that I used this other value because that's what I use, and I didn't want to cause confusion. So in the next step, which is lap 3, as you can see, we have all the values inside the satisfaction range. So what does it mean? It means that for the brakes, we finally hit a value inside the range, and we can start halving the difference. Same for the suspension. This is the first time we hit inside the satisfaction range, so we are going to start halving the difference. And in the case of the rear wing, the front wing, and the gearbox, we already hit the inside and the outside of the range. So we are continuing to have the difference in each iteration. The value that is still a bit off is the engine here. We haven't hit outside the satisfaction range, but as you can imagine, we're very close. Why? Because we started at 500, we are at 596. And most it can be is 628. So between 628 and 596, we are very close. So we are going to keep adding, but we are going to add a little bit less in next step because we are already very, very close to the limit of the range in this case. In the other cases, we are in the front wing and the gear, we are very, very close already. As you can see, for the front wing, we are already inside a maximum of 32 points, a maximum. So it cannot be more than 32. It's, of course, going to be a little bit less than that. And the same for the gear. We are already in a range of 32, so we are getting very, very close already. And this is only 3 steps. So next one, we are going to keep having the differences in the values that we already hit inside and out the range. And in the engine, I added a bit more. I added 16. And we finally hit the outside of the range. So 516 is the values and the difference we need to calculate, which is 16. So we are going to move 8 points towards the outside of the range because we want to keep pushing towards the outside to know where the limit is. For the engine, we are going to take the 612, the 596, and take that difference and have it again, which is again 8 points, same as it for the wings. We are going to subtract 8 points. For the brakes, we are still a little bit off. We have 813 and 750, so we have 63 points difference here. We need to use 32, 31 for this one. The gearbox, we are between 564 and 548, so we are very close within the 8 points, if I'm not mistaken. And then the suspension, we are also still a little bit off, between 750 and 688. So we are going to have that difference again. So, lap 5. This is lap 5. We continue to do this method. We are going to revisit this lap in particular. We are going to revisit it at the end of the explanation because there are alternatives on what you can do starting at this point. When you are really close, you have a few alternatives of what you can do with your practice laps instead of keeping narrowing the differences. You have other things that could be beneficial for you to do. And with the level of precision you have after lap 5, you should be close enough to a good setup. So there are alternatives. But as you can see, we keep narrowing the differences. We are at 4 points already for the wings. We are again at 4. The next step is going to be 4 points, 2 for the engine. We are at 31 for the brakes. We are at 8, so we are going to use 4 for the next step for the year. And we have still 31 points difference, so we are going to use 16 or 15 for the next step for the suspension. For the lab number 6, we have these values, and you can see we have news here in the suspension because we finally hit the outside of the range again. So we are pretty close, within 15 points now. The engine, we keep increasing, but it's already at 4 points difference. So we are going to use 2 for the next step. Here in the brakes, we're still a little bit off. We are between 766 and 750, 16 points difference. For these ones, we are going to use 8 for the next step. And this one is pretty close to 564 and 560, so we are going to use 2. So we have lab number 7. Lab number 7 is almost there in most of the values. We have already 1 point, one possible point for the wings. We have 1 possible point for the engine, and we have 8 points. Half of 8 points is 4 for the brakes. We have already within 2 points. We're going to use only 1 point difference for the year, and the suspension is pretty close again. We're in 8 points range, so we are going to use a 4 to get to the middle of that. I'm going to show all the steps. I'm going to show all the 8 laps because for this example, I did all the 8 laps, and then we are going to talk about cutting this process short and using perhaps not perfect, but very close values to save steps and do other things. So this is lap number 8. As you can see, we found the limit again for the front wing. We hit outside the limit, and we found the limit. The limit is between 502 and 501. Same could be said about the engine, between 612 and 611. The brakes are between 762 and 758. The gear is between 561 and 560. And finally, the suspension is between 704 and 708. So now that we have a very good idea of where the limits of the range are, we are going to take down notes on what are the values where that are the closer we could research. We are going to take down notes of those numbers, and then we are going to apply the half of the range I spoke about at the beginning. So this is previous to quali. Here it's the quali 1 screen. And the values that are set here for the parts are these values I told you that we were going to be taking down notes. Notice that the application is going to show us atop a practice labs, one of the practice labs we did during the process. And it's going to pick the practice lab where the net time is the best. It's not necessarily a practice lab where the setup is the best. It's simply because we are going to try to find the limit, not the setup where the lap time is the best. Our method is not meant to get a practice lap that return an optimal lap time. So this is a little bit counterintuitive. I tend to ignore these laps. Of course, that if something happened and you couldn't complete the process, it would be a pretty nice value to use. But in this case, as we did several practice laps, and we reached a value that was very, very close to the limit in all the cases, we're going to continue with the method. So these are the values I picked for the limit. And in the next step, we are going to show the values that I finally used for the quali. Well, remember that the driver's range of satisfaction was 128. Well, and half of that is 64. So I used this value of 64, and I added that value or subtracted it depending on in what direction the limit was. So if adding will take me out of the range, well, I will be subtracting, and in the other way around. If subtracting will take me again out of the range, I need to move towards inside the range, so I will be adding. So these are the final values used for the setup. We are going to talk about what happens if I stop at lap 5. First of all, we are going to analyze how close we are after 5 laps, because as you can see in this example, we are going to be very close. The first row, in both cases, lap 5 and lap 8, the first row are the values that I think, or I believe, are going to be the closest possible to the limit of the range. What happens, for example, with the wings? Well, we have 508 and 500 and 500. So what I'm going to use as the limit? Well, it's pretty close to use the value in the middle as an approximation to the limit. Same between the engine. We have 612 and 604. Well, I picked 608, the value in the middle, as the limit, and so on with the other cab parts. So I did what I just told you about. I add in the cases where adding takes me back inside the limit, and if I subtract, I get out of the range of the driver. And in the case of the engine, well, I subtract because adding will take me out again of the range. So I put the values here, and this is the final. These are the final values that I would be using if I only had or decided to use 5 practice laps for the setup. And in the case of the 8 laps, as you can see, we are going to have more precise values, but check how the wings, the engine, the gear, and the suspension are really, really, really close. The only one that is a bit off is the brakes. In the case of the brakes, we're still a bit off. But for the rest, we're pretty close. So Here is for you to decide when to stop or when to continue. I recommend that the first times you do this this procedure, you try to do it with all the labs until you get used to it. After 2 or 3 times, you could start doing what I'm going to explain next. So now what to do with the remaining 3 labs? Because if you get really, really close after 5 labs, you can use the remaining 3 labs for different things. You will need to pick one of these. You won't be able to do both things at the same practice session. But perhaps if you're playing with a friend, one can do one thing and the other one can do another thing, and you can share information and get more information out of your practice. There are 2 things that can be done. One is to test for wing splits. The catch here is that you can try different wing split values. First of all, because most of you, I understand, don't have an understanding what the wing split is. Well, the wing split is using a different value for each wing separately. That means that you can, for example, here we have a value of 566. Well, what happens if for the front wing I use a value of 500, and for the rear wing I use a value of 626, for example, or 632? That would be adding 66 points to the central value of the wings. Well, you could notice that the lap time can improve, or it could be worse. It depends. What are the 2 things that you should be looking? Well, the direction of the split. That means what of the 2 wings we are subtracting from, and what of the 2 wings you are adding to. That is one thing. And the other thing besides the direction is the size of the split. You could use smaller values like 20, 40, 60, or you could be using very big values. You will notice that there are some tracks on the game that have wing split values that are, I think, around the highest one are around 250 points or 200, which is a lot. And the bigger the ideal wing split is, the bigger the time difference you gain from using this wing split. So this is something you want to research on. If you don't have previous data from the track, you will needing to check in what direction the split goes and what is the size of the split. But if you have previous data, you can fine-tune the wing split. I don't know if in the previous race you found, or one of your teammates or a friend has a value from the same track that you used something like 150, for example, and that was a good value. Well, you can start from the central point, perhaps. In this case, the ideal center of the wings, that is 566, and then add or subtract, depending on the direction of the split, this 150. And then, well, in another lap you could be doing a smaller step. Instead of 150, you could be using 80, 100, or a similar value, and check how much you gained in one case or the other, and try to get an intuition or on where the peak of the split is, where you would be getting the best lap time possible for this track. And sometimes you want to, if you have this 150 value, well, you want to get 50, 60, 100 points on one direction, and then you also want to check 500, not 500, sorry, 50, 60, 100 in the opposite direction to conclude which of the two would be better. That is for wing splits. As I said, it will take a bit of time to research, but you would be getting interesting benefits, especially in those tracks where the natural wing split of the track is pretty big. In those cases, you are going to be gaining considerable time. I've seen time gains of almost a second, and a second is a lot in a quali. Then the other thing that you could be trying with your practice laps is the TCD. Oh, I'm sorry, I was missing Johnny's question. No, they are not the same. They are very similar. If you have a direction and a size, an idea of the size of the wing split, it's going to be similar. But this wing split is also dependent of the driver. So if you have different driver, it's going to change. It's weather dependent too. But you have a very big starting point, a very good starting point. If you have raced, it doesn't matter if the temperatures were not the exact same or the driver was not the exact same. If you had a race there, you have a very good idea of the direction and the size of the split, but it's not a fixed number, not at all, and it's going to vary even if you are playing with a team or with other friends. You are all going to have a different wing split value. TCD is a different thing. First of all, those who haven't checked the wiki and the abbreviations or section, TCD stands for tire compound difference. It's the difference in the lap time between two consecutive compounds. That means the difference between extra softs and softs, or between softs and mediums and hards. You are going to find, of course, that the softer the compound, the faster the compound. What happens? Well, you need to have an eye on the weather for this. Why? First of all, before I forget, TCD only can be measured if the practice is a dry practice. If you have a wet practice session, you cannot see a difference between the dry compounds. You're going to find out that they all have the same time difference, and when under wet conditions, it doesn't matter if you are on the harder or the softer one. The track is wet, and you're going to have a bad time because you are on the wrong type of tire for the weather, and the difference cannot be measured under those conditions. Yeah, well, that happens, Johnny. that you found the hard way. Anyway, that for the wet conditions, but when the practice is dry, you can measure the time difference between two compounds. So if you have if you have extra softs in one lab and you have softs in the other lab, in the next lab, of course, keeping all the other conditions the same, because if you vary something, you're not going to get a good measuring. But if you keep your driver the same, you don't update your car or upgrade your car, and you keep the exact same setup, you're going to be able to retrieve this time difference between the two compounds. What is this useful for? Well, in the case of a dry track and a dry race, you are going to get a very good idea of what kind of race time difference you will have if you use one more compound or one less compound. This is very important because you have very extreme situations when the weather is very cold and when the weather is very hot. When the weather is very hot, you're going to find out that the time difference between two compounds is very, very small. So in those cases, you are possibly going to be favoring the strategies where you will be stopping less times and using the hardest possible compound. This is a rule of thumb. That means that in most tracks and most cases it will work that way. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but you can be relatively confident that if the temperatures are 45, 50, or 40, well, it's going to be a good idea to try to stop less times and use a harder compound. And the opposite, of course, happens. If you have a very cold track for the race, well, it's probably going to be a good idea to use the softer compound possible and to stop more times. Of course, this also has other factors involved. What does it mean? Well, you have tracks that have very long pit lanes. Those pit lanes can mean something like 20 seconds inside the pit lane every time you pit. In some tracks, like in the oval, you can spend the time that lasts the full lap inside the pit lane, which is a lot. So you need to check these things to not only the lap time difference between the two compounds. You also need to check what happens with the pit lane. How long will you be spending inside the pit lane? If you stop more times, well, you need to add the pit lane times for every of the pit stops you will be making, and compensate that with the tire compound difference that we were talking about. And you also need to have an eye on the overtaking character of the track, because the tracks where the overtaking is almost impossible, well, those tend to favor strategies with less stops, regardless of the TCD or regardless of other factors. If you know you're not going to be able to overtake anyone, well, you better stop less times and spend more time on track. Time fueling and pitting is not time burning. Anyway, well, these are the two things you can do with these remaining laps. The TCD has another particularity besides the one I told you about with the wet track during practice, not making it possible to measure it. And it also that this time difference that you have between two consecutive compounds can be multiplied by the number of compounds, because it doesn't change. That means that if you measure the TCD using extra softs and softs, you're going to have the exact same TCD between the soft and the mediums. So you can multiply this time difference and get an idea what happens if instead of one more compound, I use two more compounds, because sometimes that is useful information to decide on a strategy where you can perhaps add one stop, but use two less compounds instead of one. I don't know, perhaps you have an option where you have three stops on extra soft and you have two stops, but you cannot make those two stops on soft. You need to go to medium, so you need to take the two steps difference and multiply by the number of laps and check if that is going to be a good deal or not for you. So I think I have explained all I have prepared for today, but I have some minutes if you have questions regarding this or regarding anything else. I need to leave to the doctor, but we are okay with the time. So if you have questions, shoot. If anyone wants an open mic, I can open the mic, ask. Yeah, I need to. I could be sending some images. Perhaps later. Oh, fantastic, Ian. I'm very happy to see some of my mentees have joined the seminar. This saved me some mentoring time. I'm going to I'm going to send an image through this channel's text chat, so you can keep the image I show you with the 250 and 125 and all the suggested values to start moving from. So you can keep it for yourself. I have it in Spanish and in English, so I'm going to send it in both languages because I see Jacobo that he seems to speak Spanish, so it would be useful for him. When you're, I explained that during the second lab, but what you do is to take a value that is within the size of the range. I take the half of the range. In my case, the range was 128, so I take 64, Johnny, and I move that value in any direction. You can move on one direction or the other because you don't have a clue in what direction the limit is. In those cases, because the feedback basically gave you nothing to work with, so you take half of the range and you move that amount of points in a direction you pick, and you keep moving in that direction after that. Unless, of course, you hit outside and you need to start alternating. But yes, you know that you cannot be from one of the other limit of the range. You cannot be more than 128 points away. If you're in one limit, well, the other limit is 128 points away. So using half of the range is always a good bet. You could use any value inside the total of the range. If the range is 128, anything between 1 and 128 would be fine. I recommend you use half of the range to move. If you satisfy the driver in the first lap for that particular part. Any other questions? Don't need to be related to what we just saw. Take the opportunity to ask your questions and get some value out of your time. Okay, well, yes, Johnny has the advantage of having me as a mentor, so if he needs to ask something, he will. What about the rest? It's liters per second on bits. Oh, you want to know how long does it take to refuel for your crew? Of course, it's Phoebe. No, I'm going to give you a nice hint. I haven't. I've never been too worried about the exact time it takes to refuel a car, but know that if you have a value, a number of liters within a range, as we were talking about a pretty big range, you are going to get more or less the same refueling time. But if you go a bit outside that range of number of liters, you will start seeing differences in the time it takes to fuel your car. So beware of that. Start investigating what happens if I fuel, I don't know, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, 130, and check what happens when you change the number of liters. It won't give you a formula as you are trying to investigate. I don't think it's needed. I really don't think you need to make a precise regression to get this formula. You need to know where is this boundary where you add more liters and you start seeing that the pit times are getting worse. You need to start checking this approximate number, not be too worried about formulas in this case. 180, Ricardo, will definitely make you slower. That is for sure. The question is, where is this limit in the number of liters where you start seeing this added time in the pit? Of course, you need to know that by the time you get to elite, you don't want to make your fueling strategy too slow. Sometimes you will find that taking that into consideration will add to this puzzle you make between deciding what compound to pick, how many times to stop. Well, the weight of the fuel will make you slower too. Well, how much slower does the weight of the fuel make me? How much more time in pits do I spend if I add X amount of liters to my fuel load? It's a big puzzle. You need to take all the factors and factor all in to get the best strategy. But for a rookie or any beginner, the TCD is a very good start point. Then you start adding precision and more information as you are more experienced in the game. Anyway, peeps, if there are no more questions, I'm going to call it the day and the seminar now. Thanks everyone for attending and see you next. I don't have plans yet because I'm starting a big course on Monday, so I don't know how my scheduling will be. If I'm going to have time for repeating this or preparing a new one, this is a big question mark for me. But for now, it's been a great time. It's been an honor to do my best to help you. I wish you all very successful ship careers. See you next time. Bye-bye.